only of recapturing the spirit of other days. And he said his coming was an oasis, the very thing, an oasis. Addicts or drinkers or whoever, insert your cause, your what's going on. They're like that. And I thought that paragraph was kind of interesting, that this guy, Bill, is not at all looking for anyone. He's not on the hunt for someone to help him in fellowship. But it just so happens that, his paths cross. Maybe that's chance. Maybe that's God giving Bill a hand, or maybe it's his friend's journey of needing to help someone intersecting. That's really what it is. All of those things. But here he comes, not looking for help, but up comes a phone call and over comes a friend who's got a message to pass on. And this starts Bill's journey into recovery. Fellowship actually comes alongside him before he even realizes the problem or what he needs help with. And I thought that was kind of interesting, because I had always thought, like, it's got to start with me. I have to go looking. I have to kick this journey off. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere unless I take my recovery by the horns. And there's some truth to that. Obviously, I have to be willing, but there's a deeper truth that there's something going on that's beyond me. And that if I'm aware and open to what the universe, to what God is doing in my midst, then I start to see, maybe in hindsight, those phone calls are actually God bringing fellowship and God bringing other people to me. And I just want to keep an openness to that, because you never really know who's going to be the fellowship that's going to kick you off into your journey or help you onwards. And this friend is a really good example of not, coming on strong or forcing things down Bill's throat. Because the next 3 pages are Bill kind of wrestling with it, like, oh no, I don't believe in God, or I believe kind of in God, but not in that kind of God, a personal God. Things that we can all resonate with or can reflect on in our own stories. Later chapters spend the whole chapter thinking on that. But for Bill, it comes to that. But his friend suggested on page 12 what then seemed like a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? And I can see that in this case, fellowship is not like a heavy-handed strong arm, like, here it is, I'm going to stick it right to you and you better accept what I'm saying. But the fellowship here has the big picture in mind, that I'm here to help my friend. I'm here to help lead him one step farther, and I don't have to like slam him like a football on the touchdown line. I just have to take him one step forward and trust that God is going to do the work. So there's a humility in fellowship of knowing the big picture, and not having to take it all the way there yourself. Why don't you choose your own conception of God? And I remember the first time I heard that, I was at a Jericho Road meeting at Jack Purcell, that I guess I had been kind of invited to, because I had alluded enough to someone that to the guy who was speaking at that group, that I was kind of struggling with addiction in my life, but I hadn't yet, like, I was like Bill, I hadn't yet realized how much help I needed. And this person, Andy, just said, why don't you come and kind of sit in? And so for a bunch of weeks, maybe months or years, I would come some Tuesdays and sit in. And some older fellow there, and this was, I didn't even gather his name. This was one of the first meetings. He said that very thing to me, that he had to choose his own conception of God and then dream up, like, what kind of God do I need in my problem? And the guy listed, he's like, I needed someone strong. I needed a God who was understanding, who was gracious, who knew all the things about me, who would love me even when I was afraid. And all these attributes, the guy just like kind of like painted. And then he said, and so I just imagined that God was real, and that if that God was real, I would find him. And they said, and now look at me, like, I'm here and I know God and I've met God. And me not coming from recovery, I was kind of blown away. I was like, it's not how I heard God worked, but I'm really happy that that happened for this guy. And I think I've come to realize God does work a lot more like that, in kind of the mystery and looking for him. But I do remember, why don't you choose your own conception of God? Someone in real life told me that, and that wasn't the thing that I was struggling with, but it was a moment where I had fellowship with some guys that were very different stages in recovery, but their stories were kind of helping me take my first steps. So when does fellowship come into play? It can come into play right at day 0, before you even know you have a problem. And then it'll stay in play all the way through step 1 to 11, and then step 12. Obviously, step 12 is pass on the message to other people, and it's kind of forced on you. But fellowship is essential 1 to 11, even before you hit step 12. There's another thought. I thought, like, why? Like, so those are some when, but maybe why do we need fellowship? And essentially, I noted because it's just part of our rehabilitation. What I mean by that is, when I look honestly at my life, when I was trying to cope or manage or control addiction, in my life, I was full of self. And so that makes me think of page 62. It describes it pretty well. This kind of first full paragraph says, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think or we believe is the root of our problems. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, we have made decisions based on self, which placed us in a position to be hurt. Self will run riot. And so when I kind of swallow that and think on it, then I start to realize, oh yeah, there were so many places where I was in delusion, and where I tried to pass blame, or where I minimized things just to try and carry on normally. And what that did was it kind of it cut at trust, and it undermined relationships, and it caused, kind of like a two-facedness that is, no real relationship or fellowship can exist where there's kind of that two-facedness. You're like one way with some people at some times, but then like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde switches. That's going to break bridges and cut people off. And the longer we live in that, the poorer our relational circle is, right? The less strong the bonds are, and the less reliable I am to other people. And so fellowship in recovery is actually part of rehabilitation, because all of those bridges that are pretty degraded, those relationships that are pretty frayed, they need to be rebuilt. And I need the grace of other people to relearn having patience. I actually need people around me, not just self to consume me. I need to have people around me who I can extend trust to, and relearn how to trust people, and relearn how to have patience with people. Because in self-centered days, as soon as someone might have done something wrong, I could just in my mind switch off and say, like, okay, I'm done. Or give myself an excuse. Okay, I'm so done with this. I can't wait to have a break later, or something like that. That's self-centered. But fellowship gives me the grace to practice a different way of being that's not self-centered. It's others focused. Because without these others, we stay just in self where we are. So we need fellowship so that we can grow, but also it flows into helping other people. If I start to have an other person focused, it makes me see people differently. So we realize, this page 67, that people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick themselves. And though we might not have liked it, we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended us, we said to ourselves, this is a sick person. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. Like that's a very, very different experience of relating to the world, that someone who is in the midst of, a self-centered addiction is not going to look at other people with that kind of eye. But that's what we grow to as we, I guess as God kind of changes us from the inside out. That's not a selfish perspective. Literally, it's the opposite. Seeing this is a sick person, how can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry, thy will be done. Those are pretty powerful words to see only halfway through the big book. But I'm seeing that fellowship helps me to grow into a healthy person with the influence of healthy people around me. And then I pass that on in the way that I see problem people. They're no longer problem people. They're people with problems who need help, just like I need help. And yeah. I mean, I was going to share this story earlier, but then I shared the Jericho one. In my notes says share the Jericho one now. But a story that still fits is early for me in my recovery. This is a little bit after going to those Jericho meetings and then realizing I'm a couple of years into this and I'm not really making any progress in my recovery. I need a little bit more guidance than just sitting in a meeting. I needed some more help. And I ended up being in the backyard of a fine fellow in this group. And we were just kicking a ball and talking. And I brought up, because I knew, I'm like, oh, I've heard you speak at UCC, at Union City Church, and you're alluding to, your background in recovery and trying to be very smooth and like small and saying like, I kind of have a problem too. And then with a big smile, Josh says, you're a porn guy too. And then I just shriveled inside and I was like, maybe. And I recalled I can recall just like being so embarrassed and like, shh, don't say that so loud. Like the birds will hear you or something. And then they'll tell everyone and my life will be ruined. As fear is, fear will tell you things like that. But the helpful thing was that in getting that into the air, that was a point of fellowship that was able to continue and, started putting like one step at a time into LifeLab, into the Big Book Awakening, into service to others. So it's part of rehabilitation that we actually need fellowship. And maybe a how. I kind of also already mentioned that the fellowship of the big book is step 1 to 11. You gotta have other people who are coaching you through 1 to 11. And then by the time you get to that point and someone has helped you in fellowship, the whole method of the big book is that you hit 12 and the point is to pass it on. The point is not to then check out and say, okay, I did it and now I'm free, because the big book tells us it's a daily respite, and not like you get your ticket and you've metamorphized into a butterfly. Now you fly away from all your problems. It's not that. It's that you stay on the journey, and you take someone else through, and that keeps us grounded. So the how is fellowshipping, having someone, I guess, leading you through, and then having someone behind you that you're leading through. And it can also happen at the same time. It's probably essential that you've always got someone kind of above you and someone below you. If you're thinking about rock climbing or something, there's often lines that connect multiple people. And it's important to keep the true solution in mind, that it's the power of God in the midst of a fellowship that brings healing and power. And it's not the fellowship itself. It's not the power of people that help people. It's the power of God that helps people. And if we lose track of that, the risk is very quickly to overcommit and overextend, or put expectations on ourselves that are not something that we can manage. And I thought there was a really cute back and forth in this here book that I thought I would read, because I think it's not always like as clear as just like overcommitting isn't just simple like, oh yeah, I was overcommitting there. No, it's usually like very hard to piece like how much should I be committing, and sometimes there requires a back and forth. And so this is a really, probably one of my last points. It's a really fun encounter where the Fellowship of the Ring is getting ready to set out onto this quest. You can read yourself in and think of like of recovery or something. But they're setting off into what will be very challenging. And the wisest kind of person who's setting them off, he says, it'll get, the further in you go, the harder it will be to withdraw. Yet no oath or bond is laid on you to go further than you will. For you do not yet know the strength of your hearts, and you cannot foresee what each may meet upon the road. And then one person who just really wants to like commit all the way, he's ready. I would say he risks having a codependent tendency. But this character says, faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens. So it's very dramatic. And he's like, no, I'm never going to say no. Like, I'm always going to stick to this. And then the wise character Elrond says, maybe, but let him not vow to walk in the dark who has not seen the nightfall. Okay, so this guy says, you don't even know what's coming, so don't say you'll never turn back. Like, that's not wise and not necessary. But the stubborn character says, yet a sworn word may strengthen a quaking heart. It's like, no, I just got to commit all the way. I got to put all my eggs in this basket. And he says, or a sworn word will break it. What a fellowship should offer, and not try and just instantly overcommit himself to the highest level. And I thought that was interesting, that it's not always as quick and easy as knowing, here's the line, perfect, I'll always stay within it. This character nails like 4 different efforts at hitting the right line, and the wise person just says, remember, what you need to commit to is just to help. It's not to like sign on the dotted line, like to commit everything. It's just to help guide the person to the higher power. And I think that's maybe my last point about reflection on fellowship, is we are to just remember that we help each other get to the higher power, and we don't need to commit anything more. And that can start with helping someone at day 0 when they don't even know they've got a problem, and we offer fellowship there. Or it can be all the way through all the steps until someone might be at step 12 and they need to find like someone who is actively seeking a mentor. And fellowship is just as necessary at every point along the way. And I would, without wanting to make the recovery path any more dramatic, I would say it's good to remember with some good fantasy books that quests are something that can inspire us. And you don't have to look for the most dramatic moments, but sometimes it's helpful to remember that life is a significant and kind of life and death in a certain sense. And so it helps us take things seriously, and remember that my noon hour recovery call talk is more important than just, it's not cotton candy. It's actually something that is serious in my life in recovery. And helping people in fellowship is a life and death for me, and also for other people in recovery. So